Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another live lesson for PTE with Swoosh English. My name is Scott, and I hope you're very well today. Let's get started with our lesson, PTE Week 5, Lesson 20. Hello to everyone who is watching on Facebook and YouTube, and to anyone who is actually watching us with Swoosh English today. You are very welcome, and we hope you get a lot from today's lesson. So, let's get started. First of all, before we start most of our live lessons, I like to just try and have an understanding of who you are and also why you're doing the PTE test, etc., etc. So let's just go through a little series of warm-up questions. I want to know, has anyone here been doing much PTE practice in their own time? So if you're studying for PTE, the PTE examination, how much are you studying and what are you doing in your own time? Are you doing some practice papers? Are you simply reading around the topic, increasing your own vocabulary as well as understanding of the test? Are you even going to lessons with a live teacher, etc.? All of these are incredibly good, and of course, everything you can do regarding what I just said is optimal for your own improvement in your PTE studies. We, of course, here at Swoosh English can offer you all of the pre-mentioned study aids. So please come to us at pte.swooshenglish.com and we'll be happy to have you in these lessons with me live, as well as providing you with all the rest material to guarantee your success in the PTE examination. So, what other PTE tests do you find, tasks do you find the easiest? Well, maybe it's not speaking, hence why you're here watching this video lesson today with me, because after all, the speaking test does actually get the most questions on YouTube and Google in general for how to approach the various tasks. So speaking is not the easiest, I'm sure. However, you may find certain tasks easy. We want to know what you find easy about them, and also maybe if you can share your tips with any other students in my area of speaking test easy. Maybe it's writing you find easy, maybe it's listening you find easy, maybe it's reading you find easy. How have you got to that level, and what tips can you divulge? Conversely, which are the most difficult? Now, I'm sure a variety of speaking tasks will be quite difficult, especially the likes of retail lecture and describe image, as well as the variety of writing tasks as well, especially write essay. Also, what steps are you taking in your own time to improve? Are you dedicating a certain amount of time per day, maybe in your weekends or in your evenings, studying for PTE? Maybe you're not doing formal PTE training or studying. You're simply increasing your own ability regarding English by listening to podcasts, listening to TED Talks, reading academic texts, just practicing your writing, or even just having a conversation with other people. All of these soft skills are essential for your own PTE improvement, so make sure you balance it also with some dedicated PTE examination practice. All right. Anyway, let's get started with our lesson today. First of all, we're going to have a look at a review from week 2. So our speaking lesson for week 2, we did a little bit on describe image, notably how you can describe bar charts. So let's just see what people can remember from that speaking lesson. If you haven't watched it, then I recommend maybe you do watch it with this review. Just obviously every lesson every week is going to add upon the lessons that we did the previous weeks. So these review will just serve as a manner for you to refamiliarize yourself with the lesson content and apply some of the concepts that we studied in the previous class into this class, and hopefully develop your skills in a nice scaffolded manner. So let's have a look at the first question. Which of the following can appear in describe image? Which of the following can appear in describe image? So what do you think? What do you think we can appear in describe image? Bar chart, line graph, pie chart, or image. So I'm just basically questioning here you on your own knowledge of the various sub-skills and subtasks we have as part of describe image. Do you have to do a bar chart? Do you have to do a line graph? Do you have to do a pie chart? And do you have to do an image? Well, the answer, of course, is all four. Bar charts, line graphs, pie charts, and images. That is also not a definitive list. You also will have to do some process diagrams. You have to do Venn diagrams, maps, as well as tables, etc. as well. There is a variety of different tasks that you have to do for describe image. Also, last time in week's 2 lesson, we talked about the names of the vertical and horizontal axes of a bar chart. Vertical obviously being up and down, and horizontal being on the ground. So what are the names of these 2 axes? Can you remember? They are the x-axis and the y-axis. Now, when it comes to your image or chart description, it is highly useful if you can use some of this technical terminology in your response. So I recommend you do learn the names of the various components of the charts and graphs that you have to study, and include those in your description for the extra marks for your content, as well as obviously using some appropriate vocabulary. So, how do you have to prepare and speak for each describe image prompts? And how long do you have to speak in a describe image? So how long do you have to prepare and how long do you have to speak? Is it 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 1 minute, in an infinite amount of time? Well, of course, that last one is ridiculous. You have 40 seconds to speak and you have 25 seconds to prepare. So please keep these numbers handy in your memory so that you can prepare appropriately depending on the amount of time that you have in the task. 25 seconds to prepare and a maximum of 40 seconds to speak. Don't forget that once the 40 seconds have come to a close, then the task will finish and you will not be able to speak anymore. So your own time management skills are essential. And will you lose marks for not quoting the factual details within the pie chart, the graph, etc., etc.? Well, of course, that is a bit of a silly question. You will, of course, lose that you will lose marks for that. So ensure that you do actually back up what you're saying with appropriate and accurate statistical information. It is very, very important that you do so. Okay, that's the review from week 2. Now let's get into this week's lesson content and aims. So the lesson focus today will be on describe image. There's a lot of different ways that we can approach describe image. Most importantly is the different tasks and images that you will have to do on the day. As I said, there are about 8 or 9 different describe image types that you have to do. So we can obviously dedicate one speaking lesson to each of the tasks by the end of our 16-week live lesson series. Then you should have a good grasp of all of the different types of describe image and also be able to tackle them in a nice comprehensive manner. So of course, we're going to learn how to approach describe image today, developing upon what we covered in week 2 in terms of the procedure, strategies, scoring, and some tips, etc., to improve your score. Specifically, we're going to look at to learn and utilize the analysis and task structure advice for describing line graphs and pie charts today. So that would be our takeaway. We're looking at line graphs and pie charts today, whereas we did some bar charts in week 2. Subsequent weeks, we will go on to the other tasks, including images, Venn diagrams, tables, processes, etc. We're going to practice, of course, some sample describe image prompts, and at the very end, we will have a little question and answering session where you also have a chance to give your feedback and get some feedback on the lesson itself. First of all, a brief overview in speaking, just to contextualize where describe image is in terms of the speaking and writing test flow, as well as the amount of time and the amount of tasks you have to do for that task. So as you can see in the red sections here, describe image is speaking task number 4 really, if you include introduction, even though it's not really scored. So that's why I've only highlighted read aloud, repeat sentence, describe image, retell lecture, and answer short questions. So it's task number 3, task number 4, depending on how you look at it. Right in the middle of your assess tasks, you have 6 to 7 different describe image tasks that you have to do, and that will last for 30 to 35 minutes in total in terms of the speaking test overall. So if you look at that figure of 6 to 7 in the table saying number of items, you will have a variety of different describe image tasks to do. You won't get all bar charts, you won't get all line graphs, you won't get all maps. Therefore, you need to be able to do a variety of these tasks accurately to ensure you get that score that you want and need for your whatever your PTE purpose is. Okay, so let's have a look now at a line graph sample. So here we have an example line graph. You will notice that it can be described in a similar fashion to a bar chart. We have our 2 axes here. We have the y and the x axis. So therefore, it's highly useful to use that once again. So our first thing that we should do when we are obviously doing this task on the day of the PTE examination, don't forget you will only have 25 seconds to prepare for this task. Therefore, you have to do it quickly. But now we're going to go into a bit more depth and analysis about how we can essentially get that information that we need from our line graph and apply that to our spoken response. So on the right-hand side, I have a series of questions that we can really elaborate on and think about in terms of our answer. So let's have a look through of these and basically one by one so we can get understanding about what this line graph is showing us. Let's have a look first of all at question number one. What is your purpose for speaking in this task? So why are you speaking? I know this is probably quite wordy, but what are you doing? Well, of course, you're speaking about the different trends and statistics of the chart and how you can put that into perspective. Don't forget for this task here, you have about 3 sections of the introduction, as well as the chart overview, your main points, and your conclusion. So you're speaking about the different aspects of the chart in terms of their relationships within 40 seconds. So basically that's the wordy way of talking about what this task has to do. Question number two, what is the topic of this image? So what do you think the topic is? Now, this image here doesn't actually have a title. Keep in mind that some of the tasks will have titles and others won't. If you can see the title, then that essentially is your topic. However, we don't actually have one. So what will we be talking about in terms of what, if we could actually just basically put this information into one sentence? Well, let's have a look here and have a look here and have a look here as well. Well, as we can see, we have 3 different lines and we have muffins sold, scones sold, and cookies sold. So basically, if we could put that into information, it is the amount of muffins, scones, and cookies sold over a period of time. Maybe we could obviously combine that information together. What do muffins, scones, and cookies represent? Well, they obviously represent like sweets or desserts or other forms of tray bakes, etc. So you could say sweet foods in terms of muffins and scones and cookies sold overall. What information is given on the x-axis and what information is given on the y-axis? Let's have a look first at our x-axis. So we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. These are, of course, the days of the week. And what information is given on the y-axis? We have 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. So what information is this? Well, we have numbers. What do those numbers represent? Well, we can't be sure what they represent in terms of the numbers, so we can assume that they are single units. 0 scones, 5 muffins, 10 cookies, etc., etc. So that kind of answers our next question here, really, which is what unit of measurement is used? Well, the unit of measurement that is used here is just simply maybe single figures. What essential information can you see in this image? That is also highly important to look at. So let's have a look at that in terms of our features here. So let me just get the spotlight feature up here on the go. All right. So we have obviously 3 different lines here, and these 3 lines can represent many different trends and charts. If we have a look at the green line, well, we can obviously see there's been a slight dip and increase. We can see a blue line with a dip and an increase. We can also see a red line with a dip and an increase, and then a plateau at the very end. And how these change depending on obviously the x-axis and the y-axis. What information does this see? And also, is there any remarkable information in this graph? Is anything there that really stands out to you? Well, that of course comes down to your own perceptions of what you think is remarkable versus what you think is basically kind of boring or banal. But I obviously find some things like how certain confectionery has been more popular initially than others, and obviously that trend has continued. or maybe how there's been a dip and an increase depending on what happens as well. Maybe you obviously thought that cookies wouldn't be as popular as scones and muffins. Obviously, I think cookies are highly important. And maybe you have wondered what a scone is. What on earth is a scone? Well, as you can see, it's also the least popular confectionery item here after both muffins and cookies. So this is what you really want to do for that graph itself. You want to analyze the topic. What is the chart trying to tell us? As I said, the chart here shows the three different kinds of confectionery items, which are here, against the days of the week: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, in single units. What trends do you see? You always want to pick out maybe 2 trends at least and try and say, okay, what relationship do these trends have? How can they be compared? And then finally, any remarkable information in terms of like a conclusion or your own opinion at the very end. For example, it's not surprising that cookies sold more than muffins and scones, etc., etc. And delve that into your response. Okay, so now that we've basically got an idea of the structural overview of our response, we now have to go about trying to describe that in nice academic spoken vocabulary using the appropriate line graph terminology for this task. So it's quite a convoluted subject. There's a lot to know here regarding this. I just want to go through some basics here. So we can talk about a variety of different tasks here, or different vocabulary here. So we have obviously an increase. An increase is when we see the line go like this. So if we have a look obviously at the x-axis here, we have years, and you look at the y-axis here, we have a percentage. So obviously over the years, this percentage has increased. It's gone up from 10% to 30%. So that will often indicate an increase. We'll obviously see a flat line in which there's been no change here on either on the y-axis in terms of the increase. We can call that a standability or a steadiness, a plateau, etc. Here we can also see a decrease when we see the number and the y-axis go down against the progression of years on the x-axis. So as you notice, this decrease here is a little bit haphazard. It's small, then a flat and slight increase, and a larger decrease again. Here we have also what's known as a gradual decrease. It's very steady, it's very stable, it goes down on a nice curve, and it's not too erratic. Let's have a look at this one now, a rapid increase. So as we can see, in a very short space of time, somewhere between the years 2003, 2004, there's been an increase from 10 to over 70%. We call that a rapid increase. And likewise, conversely, we have a rapid decrease going from about 90% to approximately 30. And here we also have a pattern that's known as rapid changes. We have a decrease, sharp increase, decrease, increase, decrease, increase, and decrease over a short period of time. We can call that a rapid change as well as a fluctuation, etc. So it's obviously a good idea to get an understanding of these words, which include increase, decrease, slight, gradual, rapid, etc., etc. Now, of course, there are many different combinations that you can use for these words, so you don't have to stick to the language that has exactly been used here. Let's have a look at some more of these examples. So when we talk about our line graphs, in terms of our terminology, we can often combine our verbs, our action words, with our adverbs, which are obviously our conjoining words, act as an adjective, but they're used to describe a verb in comparison to a noun. So we can use these series of words to accurately describe our chart itself. Let's have a look firstly at our verbs to describe what do we think this kind of chart trend is. It's an arrow going up to describe an increase in our chart. We have rise, jump, grow, climb, go up. Of course, our word that we've been using is increase and rocket. All of these words may mean the same thing, and it's a good idea to obviously experiment with using these different kinds of words to keep your response varied. We also have verbs to describe a downward trend: fall, drop, decline, decrease, go down, plunge, and plummet. Now, they're the verbs. Now, how can we augment these verbs depending on describing more information about how these verbs, how the trends have gone up or gone down, to give more information, more of that precise information that we need? Well, of course, then we start to use our adverbs to describe these trends. Let's have a look at the adverbs to talk about these different arrows here and what they show and tell us with the information in the line graph itself. So we can use sharply, quickly, rapidly, steeply, considerably. Now, these adverbs here can be joined on to any of these verbs to rise and any of these verbs to describe a massive difference. So obviously this arrow is going up, so these are describing an increase. If it's going sharply down, that would describe a decrease. So as an example, we can combine some of these verbs and adverbs together to create different figures of speech that we can use to talk about our trends. For example, rise sharply, jump quickly, grow rapidly, climb steeply, increase considerably. So these can be used to show a massive or rapid increase or change in our charts. What about if the upward trend is still quite sharp, but not as sharp as some of the verbs and adverb combinations which have been described previously? Well, we can use some of these words such as significantly, substantially. So these words significantly and substantially are used to describe another rapid increase. For example, climb significantly, rocket substantially. So you notice the verb comes before the adverb in these combinations. Okay, so a small increase, which wouldn't be such at such a rapid rate, it would be more of a steady upward curve or downward curve on the chart. We can use words such as gradually and moderately. So for example, climb gradually, grow moderately, or even decrease gradually, drop moderately, for not as sharp as rise as the previous ones. What about a small rise? You notice that this is almost a flat line overall. Well, we can use slightly and slowly. For example, increase slightly, decline slowly, to talk about a reasonably small increase or decrease in the chart, and therefore give a bit more accuracy to our description. So we've covered there the verbs, which talk about adverbs and verb combination, which describe uh, upward or downward trends. What about a flat line? How can we use some of those combinations to describe this in our chart? Well, it's the same way. We can say our main verbs here, which include stay, remain, maintain. And we can use those with a augmented adjective or adverb form, such as stay constant, remain steady, maintain stable, stay steady, maintain constant, remain stable. Any combination of those can describe a flat line. Now, of course, if I just go back to the previous slide, then of course we can also talk about, just very briefly, are rapid changes, fluctuations as well. They can describe how that's changed quickly over a short period of time. So a lot of different vocabulary that we can use moving forward with our line graph descriptions. So let's see how we can now apply some of that to our line graph gap fill. So let's have a look at that same line graph again. As you can see now, there has been a sample answer which has been included here. So this is actually an ideal template for this task itself. It covers the introduction or overview, two main points and being described, as well as a remarkable point that we have left in terms of a conclusion. So I want everyone to have a look at this chart here and just see what kind of words can be used in this sample answer itself. What have been omitted and what words may logically fit in. So obviously you're going to have to refer to the graph itself and make your logical assumptions based on that. We'll do the first sentence together and then I'll leave everyone to complete the rest, and then I'll finally come back and give some feedback at the end to see how you have done. Let's have a look at the first sentence together. I'll underline it. So we have the the blank graph, blank the sales of cookies, muffins, and scones, blank the week, blank Monday to Friday. So what words do we think are missing here? Let's look at the first one. There's something graph something. So we always recommend that you do actually start your image description with an appropriate opening phrase, which involves a combination of the verbs, and obviously the words that describe the chart itself. So what kind of graph is this? Well, hopefully you've been listening, or you simply look at the task title at the very beginning, at the very top. It is the line graph. So we would say the line graph. Now, what words, what verbs can be used here to depict what the line graph is trying to entail? Well, we can use a combination. The line graph shows, the line graph displays, the line graph highlights, the line graph pertains to, etc., etc. There are a lot of different verb combinations we can use. Simply, we can say the line graph shows, it displays, it highlights. We obviously use more complex terms like pertains to as well. Might be a bit more verbose, but it can be used. So use a combination of these. The bar chart shows, the line graph displays, the pie chart highlights, etc., etc. The sales of cookies, muffins, and scones the week on Friday. Okay, so what kind of words can be used here? So we've got our main content words. There are obviously different words that can be used here overall as well. So muffins and scones, the week. Okay, so the week and Monday to Friday. We're looking for prepositional phrases here. So if we're talking about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, what preposition phrase can we use to talk about how we progress with the week? Well, a word I would use would be through. So we could say cookies, muffins, and scones through the week. What about Monday to Friday? What other prepositional phrase can we use? We could use from. So to complete our first sentence, we could say the line graph shows the sales of cookies, muffins, and scones through the week from Monday to Friday. Just some simple answers that we can use. Obviously, there are different words that we can also use in this situation. I'd be interested to hear about what combinations you think would work as well. But here is a sample answer which works grammatically. So have a look at that. I'm now going to pause the video, turn off my camera. I'll obviously still be listening, and give anyone a little bit of time to try and work out the rest of the chart itself. What are the remaining missing answers here? And see if you come up with your own sample answer based on this template. I will give you a little bit of time to complete that. Good luck. All right, so let's go through an analysis of our line graph fill and see what answers you managed to find that would logically work. So we've done our first sentence. Let's have a look now at our second sentence. So we have something generally sold the most. So what item sold the most? Well, if you have a look at the line graph, that is pretty easy to see and figure out what has sold the most. Cookies, with obviously this figure way up here compared to these figures here. Remember that the trend upwards and across indicates a positive correlation. Therefore, you can see that number is the most. So we can say here simply, I'll fill in the answers down here. cookies generally sold the most, with a something increase through most of the week from 13 sold on Monday to 23 sold on Sunday. So this is obviously, we have the word increase here, one of our verbs that we were talking about in terms of a positive correlation. So what word would come here before? Well, we're looking for one of our adverbs which augment that increase. So it's up to you to decide what the increase is. If you have a look here, have a look at that line angle. What do you think that increase could be represented by? There are obviously a few different answers that can be used. If we have a look at our previous slide, we could say with a maybe substantial increase. I'll say substantial increase. We could say a significant increase, etc., etc. But we obviously want to use a word which refers to that increase being quite sharp. Sharp increase as well can be used, and give more accuracy to our chart description. However, there was a on Tuesday. So what happened on Tuesday? And you will see that there are two words missing. Well, as you can see, there's been a downward trend on the Tuesday compared to the upward trend for the rest of the chart itself. So what could have happened on Tuesday? There's been a decrease, there's been a drop, there's been a decline. So obviously we want to use an adverb and verb combination to describe that. We could say there was a slight drop, there was a small decrease, etc., etc. So we could say for that sentence again, cookies generally sold the most, with a substantial increase through most of the week from the 13th sold on Monday to the 23 on Sunday. However, there was a small decrease on Tuesday. Okay, what about scones? Scones sold the out of the three, with a maximum of sold on any day. So out of the three, how do scones compare? If we have a look at our graph here, we can see that scones, well, they're way down in terms of compared to muffins or even cookies. So we're looking for a superlative out of all of these. It's definitely not the most. What's the opposite of most? The least. So scones sold the least out of the three, with a maximum of what sold. So we're looking for an actual number here to refer to the amount sold. So even though we're not exactly sure what this is, we can see that here is 5 and up here is 10. I would say it's slightly above 5. We could probably say that maybe a maximum of 6 were sold. So that could be here, or it could be here where the number is approximately the same. So we could say maximum of 6 has been sold on any day. Let's look at our next sentence now. The amount through the week, the amount something through the week, and something steady on Saturday and Sunday, with 6 sold. So what happened through the week? Well, as we can see, it went up and it went down depending on the sentence itself. We could probably say the amount fluctuated through the week. So it went up, down, and it went up again. And something steady on Saturday and Sunday. So we're looking for what this graph here actually shows us. What does this line actually say? Well, we can see that it's a straight line. We could say that it remains steady on Saturday and Sunday, with 6 sold only. From the graph, cookies seem to be the what food type? Well, if we have a look here, we can see that cookies obviously are much higher than either muffins or scones. So what can we say about that? We could say the most popular food type overall. And that serves as our little conclusion at the very end. So here's our sample answer. Hope you managed to find that useful. Remember that there is the introductory phrase, which gives an overview of the chart. We then make a comparison with at least 2 of our features, and then we finally finish off with a concluding remark, which serves as something of interest, and that is, of course, that cookies sold much more than the others overall. So very, very useful to use and to talk about. Okay, so let's have a look now at some of our useful pie chart terminology as well. So a pie chart is a little bit different. We don't actually talk about any trends necessarily. We also don't talk about the y-axis or the x-axis because there isn't one overall. Instead, we talk about the percentages and the pieces that the pie chart is indeed separated into. We can say it's split into segments. So segment 1, segment 2, segment 3, segment 4, segment 5, the largest segment, the smallest segment, the different colored segments, etc. Figures are often quoted in percentages, for example, 45% for the largest and 5% for the smallest. Instead of using, obviously, some words to talk about the pie chart in terms of its increase and decrease, well, we can't do that because we're not talking about a trend that changes. We use words like majority, minority to describe the largest and smallest segment. So for example, we could say the yellow section is represented by a majority of 45%, whereas the smallest segment, whatever that represents as 5% of the smallest segment. We can use phrases like represent, as I said, depicts, comprises, accounts for when discussing the data and information. And we'll show how that works in one of our practice prompts very soon. But for example, we could say the pie chart shows the different percentages of the pie chart represented by different colors. The largest section, represented by the yellow color, accounts for 45% of the pie chart, whereas the smallest section is depicted by the blue segment with only 5% of the pie chart. Okay, let's go through some of our PTE describe image tips now. Remember, you have 25 seconds at the beginning, so please use those wisely. Attempt to recognize the image rather in your own way, rather than the salient features of the image in order to better organize your thoughts or impressions. So obviously, everyone's going to be able to pick out different trends in different parts of the pie chart or the line graph that they find interesting. So look at it and just see what jumps out to you. How can you get that overview, and what features do you find very extreme from which you can make your comparison? So see what works for you, extract that, and then move forward with that information in your spoken analysis. Of course, you should immediately identify and name the type of image. Is it a line graph, a bar chart, a table, a chart, a map, etc., as well as the headings, labels, and the axes. So obviously, the bar chart, and the heading talks about whatever the title is at the very top. I can use that then for my introductory phrase. What do the labels say? Well, we have a percentage here, we have weeks here, and the axes. Okay, we can see this is happening here and here within the chart itself. That information is highly useful for the introductory overview, as well as for giving information in the pie chart, line graph, etc. itself. Identify what you think are the main points and focus on these in your response. Remember, you should not be talking about simple points by themselves. You want to be able to make comparisons with other parts of the graph or chart itself. Identify the trends and begin to think about how you could describe them. Are they much bigger? Are they much smaller? How can they be compared? Figure out the exceptions, such as the highest and the lowest values. What obviously works for me when I look at some of these images and these bar charts and pie graphs, etc., is I want to find like the highest and the lowest. That's a very good comparison, something that is very notable to me, and something that I find you can find very easy to talk about in terms of the extremes. Remember to organize your speech into logical content, including your introduction, your main idea or ideas, and your conclusion and implications. Not stop speaking, as the microphone will close after a few seconds of silence. Ensure you use fillers such as let me think, now, well, give me a moment, rather than ums and ahs. If the microphone is inactive for 3 seconds, remember that that will indicate that your response is finished with PTE's own intelligent software. So it's very, very important that you do not stop speaking for any prolonged period of time. You don't want obviously to be halfway through your response, get tongue-tied, not speak, then the microphone closes. So if you really, really have to keep speaking and are trying to search for language, use some of these fillers to keep that microphone open. What you shouldn't do is obviously stop speaking at all or go back and start speaking again to correct a mistake, because that will of course take away points for your overall fluency. Of course, also be aware that you begin speaking when you hear a tone prompting you to begin, indicating that the clock has started and that you should then start speaking immediately after you hear it. Now, in terms of the scoring, each image is scored out of 5 for content, pronunciation, and oral fluency. To get a score of 5 out of 5 for content, you need to describe all of the main images, all the main details of the image, how these details relate to each other, and include a conclusion, mention a remarkable point. So by all the main details are obviously the biggest trends that you can use and compare them with. You're looking for 2, possibly 3 in the time. Remember, you also can't talk about the individual points. The key word here in the second bullet point is you need to discuss how these details relate to each other. You're making comparisons. It's not good enough to simply say that there were 5% of cookies sold in 2005. You want to compare it to maybe muffins, how many cookies were sold in 2000, how muffins were sold in 2005, etc. And of course, it's also essential that you include a conclusion, mention a remarkable point at the end in the form of another feature you didn't get to describe, and give your opinion on what that shows, or maybe an overview in your own words as well. Now let's have a look at some general speaking tips. Remember that your stress, chunking, intonation, and pronunciation is also being assessed in your response. That's only the content we were talking about. You need to ensure that you stress the correct words, that you separate your phrases into appropriate little bursts. You don't speak in a monotone or at the same speed. Your intonation needs to change, and also your pronunciation is being assessed as well. So if you say a word incorrectly, you may lose a point for that too. Very importantly, make sure you speak at a natural pace and at a volume that is natural to you, whatever is natural to you. Ensure your accent is naturalized as possible. You need to attempt to speak with a native-like inflection. Even though your response is being scored in terms of how native-like you are, it is essential that you do not try and put on a faux accent, for example. And also, it's very important that you speak at a speed that is appropriate to you. You might be a naturally very fast speaker. If you're comfortable speaking at a fast speed, then do so. But also keep in mind that the faster you speak, the sooner you may run out of content. Also, conversely, if you're used to speaking very slow, then speak slow, because if you speak any faster, you may get tongue-tied. Your mind might not be able to keep up with the material you have, and then obviously you lose marks for having disjointed speech, or even worse, confuse your train of thought. Go completely silent for 3 seconds, the microphone closes, and then your response is recorded. Speak naturally and comfortably. You will get the best results that way. When you do make a mistake, and it will happen at some point, I'm sure, do not worry, and please do not let it distract you. Slip-ups are common even in native speakers, and there is no need to correct yourself unless you would really like to. Now, I don't recommend that you correct yourself in any regard, because there have been numerous times where students have corrected themselves, gone back to a previous point, corrected that word. Yes, they might have got a point back for a mispronunciation of a word, but then they've forgotten where they were. And even though they were getting off to a really good start, had a really good flow, they lost where they were, producing really disjointed speech, or even worse, not being able to speak for more than 3 seconds and that microphone closing, and therefore losing the rest of the marks for the content. So that slip up can actually, correcting that slip up can actually cost you more marks than if you simply ignored it. And of course, as I said, try to avoid any prolonged periods of silence, 3 seconds, etc. 3 seconds or more will result in the microphone closing. So please do not have any prolonged periods of silence. Finally, our structural tips before we go into our sample answers today, where you get to practice the prompts. Remember, an introduction or overview where you comment on the chart and graph as a whole. Look at what the title says, look at what the X and the Y axis says, or look at what the pie chart says, what the image says, etc. And obviously start with a phrase such as the graph or the chart shows, highlights, etc. And then describe the overview of the chart in those 3 sections that we discussed. You then will have your main points. Take 2 extreme points of the chart and make a comparison to discuss the relationship. I emphasize extreme points because they are the ones that are more obvious and will probably jump out at you, and you'll be able to get a better comparison out of them. Remember also to discuss the relationship, not the single ideas. Do this for at least 2 relationships in order to get the full score for your content. Finally, a conclusion or final remarks. Summarize the chart or the graph and go back, give your own opinion on what it shows, it means, or talk about something you find interesting and remarkable. Okay, now let's have a look at our first describe image prompt. So we're going to have a look now at some prompts, which you guys will get to practice by yourself. And here are some general self-assessment questions you can use to ensure that you have done as well as you think you have. First of all, did the student begin with an appropriate phrase? Did you begin with an appropriate phrase? Did you say the bar chart shows when in fact it was a line graph, etc., etc.? Did you not begin with phrases like that at all? Make sure you begin with all those appropriate phrases and make sure it's relevant and appropriate to the task that you are doing. Did the student include most of the main points of the graph? Are there at least two comparisons, and were they compared in terms of the other parts of the graph? Were they talking about extreme examples? Was this information correct? Did the student discuss the relationship of the main points with supporting details? And obviously I emphasize the point supporting details here. Did you pull information and statistics from the chart? And was that information accurate? Did they finish with a conclusion or remarkable point? Of course, that's important for the content that you actually have one of those conclusions at the end. That's your content scoring criteria. Did the student read smoothly at a natural pace? Did they obviously keep their speech nice and constant? Did they speak too fast or did they speak too slow? Were there any breaks in their delivery? Were there any unnatural pauses, as I said? Did the student pronounce all words correctly? And did the student stress words and vary their intonation? Or did they sound like a robot the whole time? Remember, intonation is also being assessed in terms of your pronunciation and your oral fluency. Basic questions you can use when testing yourself or testing other people to see how well you might have done overall. So let's have a look now at our first mock prompt today. So here we have the first mock prompt. I am going to turn off the camera now for 25 seconds. Remember, you will have a prompt like this in the day. Look at the text below. In 25 seconds, you must read this text aloud as naturally and clearly as possible. You have 40 seconds to read aloud. So have a look at the chart. Remember to try and pull up the essential information. What does the y-axis say? What does the x-axis say? What are the lines showing? And also see how you combine that with one of your opening phrases. Remember to take at least two examples from the chart in terms of the extremes and make those comparisons and finish off with a conclusion or a remarkable point. So you 25 seconds to prepare your answer and then 40 seconds for delivery. Your 25 seconds to prepare starts now. Okay, let's see how you got on with your response. Now you have 40 seconds to give your response. 40 seconds, what I recommend you do is you record yourself and you play it back. Let's see how well you can do. 40 seconds to give your response begins now. How did you get on? Did you find this line graph pretty easy to talk about, or did you get a little bit tongue-tied with some points? Let's have a look now at a sample answer, and I will show you delivery of it as a native speaker would give it. The line graph shows the sale of three kinds of fast food, hamburgers, pizza, and fish and chips in single units between 1970 and 1990. Firstly, Pizza was the most popular fast food in 1970, with 300 sales compared to approximately 80 and 25 for fish and chips and hamburgers. Secondly, hamburgers became the most popular in 1990, with 500 sold. Remarkably, hamburgers and fish and chips became much more popular, whereas pizza sales declined between 1970 and 1990. Here is an example of a sample answer which would satisfy the majority of the criteria for this task. First of all, we're talking about obviously hamburgers, fish and chips, and pizza in our line graph sample. We're talking about in our x-axis the years and how they progressed, and here we have single units in the upward trend here from 0 all the way to 600. So the response actually started off with an appropriate opening phrase. With the line graph shows the sales of 3 kinds of fast food, which are hamburgers, pizza, and fish and chips, in single units between 1970 and 1990. So we have our overview presented well, line graph, what the information tells us, what the x-axis tells us, and what the y-axis tells us. Let me move on to our first main point. Firstly, pizza was the most popular fast food in 1970, with 300 sales compared to approximately 80 and 25 for fish and chips and hamburger. So we're talking about the year 1970 here, and we're comparing these 3 pieces of information. So as we can see, there's a massive difference here between how pizzas were sold with over 300 compared to 80 and 25 approximately respectively with chips and hamburgers, as we can see. So we've also used a comparative word here, compared, to compare about those examples. That's one of our first main points. Secondly, hamburgers became the most popular in 1990 with 500 sold. So now we're talking about this, and we're talking about how that is compared to these at the very bottom with 300 and 200. So in 1990, that has increased remarkably at the very top. Finally, we have our conclusive statement. Remarkably, hamburgers and fish and chips became much more popular, whereas pizza sales declined between 1970 and 1990. So we're talking about how these trends here have changed over time. We have hamburgers, massive increase. We have fish and chips, also an increase, whereas pizzas have declined. That's the point that I saw, the remarkable point that I wanted to make, that 2 of them had increased dramatically, whereas the most popular actually became the least popular out of the 3 between 1970 and 1990. So the content has been satisfied. We have our introduction, we have our 2 main points, and we have our conclusion at the very end. We've also referred to statistics throughout 1970, 1990 here in the x-axis, as well as the y-axis with the numbers here on the left-hand side. We've also used comparative language such as whereas and compared to make our examples relevant. We hope that you managed to find an answer like that. Did you manage to get an answer like that? If you're still finding this task quite difficult, then please come to pte.swooshenglish.com for some more advice and help, including classes like this, as well as some more sample answers, mock prompts, and other analysis tasks that you can do to improve your score. But of course, we would love to hear some of your answers yourself so we can give you some detailed feedback on how you did. Come to the live lessons here too as well. Would be great. So I'm now going to leave you with a second example here as a form of homework. So what I want you to do is, of course, look at this line graph itself. Tell me what it shows. Obviously, look at the information here at the very top, on the left, and on the bottom, and try and say what information this is. What's it showing us? How do the trends tell? What remarkable information can you get? So try and put all the information of this lesson together in terms of the content, in terms of how you deliver it, in terms of what's needed, and of course what you should not do as well. So please keep this to PTE style standards and time yourself for 25 seconds in your preparation and 40 seconds for your delivery at the very end. And I wish you the best of luck with this task overall. So all I want to say now before we come to the end today is thank you very much for attending, and I really hope that you got a lot out of this lesson. Were you able to identify and elaborate on the main details of the line graphs and pie charts today? Are you now more clear on the structure for this task? What do you feel you did well today in this video lesson? And what would you like to improve on? As well as any other questions, please send them to us at pte.swooshenglish.com. So thanks a lot for attending today. I wish you the best of luck in your PTE test preparation, especially for describe image and the rest. And remember to come to swooshenglish.com to find and receive more advice and training on your PTE examination. Thanks a lot for viewing. Bye-bye.